The Duke of Quernmore stopped beneath the great hanging in the long hall and asked the question he had asked 20 times since May. "Well, madam, tell me what you think of it." Susanna Pascoe looked up. The hanging ran the whole width of the north wall, 40 feet of wool and a hunting party in a wood, stags and hounds and a river with a bridge over it, and every leaf on every tree the colour of a cold sky. "The green has gone," she said. "Somebody bought a cheap yellow." The steward beside him made a small sound. The Duke did not turn his head. "Say that again." "The green has gone," she said. "Green is not a colour, sir. It is two colours lying on each other. You dye the wool blue in the vat, and then you take it through a yellow, and the eye reads the two together and calls it green. The blue is indigo, and indigo does not shift, so the blue is still there, all of it, every leaf. What has gone off, it is the yellow. That is not the weaver's fault, and it is not the sun's fault. Somebody bought a yellow that would not hold, and every leaf in that wood has been flying off it since the day it went up." "It is much admired," the Duke said. "It is much admired by people standing 30 feet away," said Susanna Pascoe. "I am standing here." The steward, whose name was Yeo, began to speak and did not finish. The Duke stood with his hands behind him and looked at the wall. He had walked 20 women past that summer and said nothing at all for a length of time that made a candle in the sconce audible. She had come there on her own 2 feet, which is the first thing to know about her. 3 weeks before, she had walked out of the town of Netherbridge with everything her father had left her in a barrow: 2 crocks of madder root, a stone of alum, a jar of indigo the size of a fist, and a set of brass scales with the maker's name worn off one pan. Elias Pascoe had been a dyer and a dye merchant, and he had died in April, owing nobody and owed by 2, and one of the 2 was the Quernmore works, £11, 6 shillings. It was written in his book in his own hand, and the hand was steady, so he had written it before the winter. She was 26. She was not beautiful, and nobody had ever troubled to tell her so, which had saved her a great deal of time. She had blue hands. A dyer's hands take the vat and keep it in the creases and under the nails, and no soap in the world touches it, and she had stopped minding that at about 17. The Quernmore road came down off the moor and into a valley with a beck running through it, and the works stood along the beck for a quarter of a mile. The loom shop with its long windows, the dye house with its 2 chimneys, the tenter ground with its rows of empty frames standing up in the grass like the ribs of something. Above it all, up the slope, the great house, grey and shut. Half the tenter ground had gone to nettles. 1 chimney was smoking, 1 was not. Yeo met her at the yard gate with a paper in his hand and the harassed look of a man behind on a list. "Miss Pascoe," he said, "you are very nearly late." "I am not late for anything," she said. "I have come about £11 and 6 shillings. You are the 21st. "I am the only one of me there is," said Susanna, "and I have come about £11 and 6 shillings, which this house has owed my father since Martinmas, and he is dead now, so it is owed to me." Yeo looked at the paper. Yeo looked at her boots, which had walked 9 miles. Then he did the thing that men in his position do when 2 facts will not sit together, which is to move both of them into a larger room and let somebody else look at them. "His Grace is in the long hall," he said. "Come this way." So she came that way, in a brown stuff gown with the hem let down twice, past a staircase wide enough for a cart, and stood under a wood full of blue leaves, and was asked what she made of it. And that is how the 21st woman came to be standing in the long hall at Quernmore, when the 20 before her had come by carriage. The Duke turned round at last. "Yeo, leave the door. Your Grace, leave the door and go and find Amos, and tell him I want him in the dye-house yard in an hour, and do not tell him why, because he will only say something." Yeo went. The door stayed open. Outside it, the rain had come on, that thin summer rain that does not fall so much as hang. £11, the Duke said. 6 shillings. And a penny, but I let the penny go. For what goods? Weld, she said. 200 weight of dried weld. cut in July when the flower was just up, which is when you cut it, and stripped and stacked dry. It is the best yellow there is on wool, and my father grew it himself on 4 acres of poor ground, because Weld likes poor ground. Your works took delivery of it in November and did not use it. How do you know it was not used? Because I am looking at your wall, said Susanna Pascoe. He walked the length of the hanging. She stood where she was. A dyer learns to stand still beside things while they do what they are going to do. There is a man in Leeds, he said, who has looked at that hanging and told me the wool was faulty. There is a man in Leeds who has been paid to say something. You are very free. You asked me what I thought, she said. If you want the other thing, there are plenty who will do it, and they will do it better than I can, because they will mean it. I cannot flatter and die at the same time. It takes the same part of a person. The Duke of Quernmore was 34 years old and had been Duke for 8 of them, and in that time nobody had told him a single unpleasant true thing without first putting a coat of paint on it. He stood with his hand flat on the wall of his own hall on a river worked in silk, and he found that his heart was going like a man's who has been running. What would you want, he said, to put my dye house right? She did not answer straight away. That was the thing he thought of afterwards, in the dark, more than once, that she took her time over it as though somebody might be holding her to it later. A wage, she said, 15 shillings a week, which is a man's wage, and I will earn it. Coal because the vat wants heat, and you have been starving it. The run of the dye house without a soul over me, and one condition, and I will not take the place without it. Name it. I will not tell you a thing is good before it has hung a season in the light, said Susanna. Not cloth, and not anything else. You can have my word, or you can have my flattery, sir, but you will find they are 2 different articles, and this house has been buying the wrong one for years. Somewhere behind them a servant crossed the far end of the hall and thought better of it and crossed back. Miss Pascoe, said the Duke, have you any notion at all what I have been doing here since May? Yo said I was the 21st of something. You are the 21st of 21, he said, and you have just applied for a position in my dye house. That is what I came for. Yes, he said, it seems to be. And then, after a moment, in a different voice altogether, nobody else even looked up at it. He gave her the dye house that afternoon and the loft over it for a lodging, and Yo wrote the wage in the book with an expression like a man swallowing a plumstone. By supper her barrow was inside the walls of Quernmore, and she did not go out of them again until the last week of September. The dye house was 2 rooms and a lean-to. In the first room stood 4 copper cauldrons over their own flues, and a long stone trough with the beck run through it, so that the water came in at one end cold and clean, and went out at the other end whatever colour the day had been. In the second room, sunk into the floor to their rims, were the vats. 6 of them, ash-lined, each the depth of a tall man, with a plank cover and a windlass over the largest. 5 of the 6 were dry and had been for years. The 6th was the blue vat, and the blue vat was alive. That is the only thing in this building worth anything, Susanna said on her first morning, and I include myself. It stinks, said Dorcas. It does. It has stunk for 11 years. It should stink, said Susanna. That is fermentation, and fermentation is a thing that is going on, and a thing that is going on can be fed. Do you know what is in there? Indigo will not dissolve in water, not in cold, not in hot, not in 100 years. You may stir it till your arms come off, so you cannot dye blue by putting blue in water, and everybody who has ever seen the inside of a dye house knows that, and nobody outside one believes it. Dorcas Rudd was 40 and did the rinsing, which is the worst work in a dye house, and had done it for 11 years with her arms in cold running water to the elbow. Her hands were split across the knuckles in a way that does not heal in a working life. Go on then, said Dorcas. How do you do it? You rot it, said Susanna. Bran and madder and lime and warmth, and it goes over, and the indigo takes up what the rot gives off and turns into another thing entirely, and that other thing does dissolve, and it is not blue, it is yellow-green like a pond. That is the whole trick. Under the plank there it is the colour of a pond, and there will be a copper skin on it, and if the vat is right, that skin has a bloom on it with a bronze cast, and we call that the flower. If the flower is up, the vat is willing. Come and look. Dorcas came and looked. Susanna lifted the plank, and the smell came up off it like a living animal, and there under it, breathing, was a slow copper skin over a liquor the colour of a stagnant pool. "That will not dye anything blue," said Dorcas. "Watch." She took a slip of white wool, wound it on her fingers, and dropped her hand and her wrist and half her forearm through the flower, slow so as not to beat air into it. She counted to 60. She brought it out yellow-green and dripping and held it up in the door where the light came in. Dorcas Rudd watched a slip of wool turn blue in the air in her own dye house, from the outside inwards, the green going out of it like a person going out of a room. "Well," said Dorcas after a while, "in 11 years nobody has showed me that." "Nobody showed you because nobody wanted you to know it," said Susanna. "There is not a trade in England that does not keep half of itself back to make the other half look like magic. Your hands are worse than mine, and you have been at it 3 times as long." She said it standing at the trough, and she said it while looking at the wool and not at Dorcas, which was the only reason Dorcas could bear it. "They crack in the summer," Dorcas said. "That is the queer thing, not the winter, the summer. Because of the lye. Have you anything for them?" "Goose grease." "Goose grease is no good on a split. It only shuts the dirt in. I will make you something with mutton fat and beeswax and a little turpentine, and you will put it on at night and wear an old glove over, and in 10 days you will feel the difference, and you will let me see them Sunday. You have not the time for my hands. I have not the time for you off work with a poisoned finger," said Susanna, "which is what you will have by Michaelmas. So I will make the salve, and we will call it selfishness, and neither of us need be uncomfortable about it." Dorcas Rudd laughed. It came out of her rusty. She went back to the trough and stood in the cold water and said nothing else that morning, but at noon she took the other end of the madder crock without being asked, and after that she took the other end of everything. In the south window of the dye house, nailed to the frame in 2 neat rows, hung 11 strips of wool the width of 2 fingers. Each had a card tag at the top, written in a small upright hand, and each was folded so that the lower half lay under the card, and the upper half lay bare to the light. They were furred with 8 years of dust. Dorcas dusted round them twice a week and had never once taken them down. "What are them?" she said. "Light tests," said Susanna, and did not look at them again for 2 months. The first time he came down to the dye house, he came at 8 in the morning with the commission papers under his arm and stood in the doorway until she noticed him, which took a while. "Miss Pascoe, there are 42 yards of hanging owed to the Earl of Corverdale by Lady Day, and there is a further set spoken for after that, and I am told the whole of it hangs on your vats." "Sit down, sir, that stool is dry. Yes, it hangs on the vats and on the yellow, and the yellow is the part you will not like." "Tell me the part I will not like." "There is no weld in this house," she said. "There is a barrel of turmeric and half a barrel of annatto in your store, and both of them are yellows, and both of them are lovely in the pot, and both of them are gone within 2 summers. Turmeric on wool is the prettiest thing you ever saw for about a year. Weld costs 4 times as much, wants a week's more work, wants an alum mordant and cream of tartar and a slow heat, and it is still good on a hanging when the man who wove it is dead. And you will use weld." "I will use weld, or I will not put my hand to it at all," said Susanna. "You may buy the cheap article from somebody else. I would rather you did it knowingly than that I did it for you and let you find out in 5 years. He turned a page over. "What else?" "Your water. The beck is soft, which is a blessing, but you have been drawing from the well in the yard because it is nearer, and that well is off limestone. Hard water throws a scum with soap, and it throws a scum with madder too, and it drags the red over to brick, and then to brown. Every red in this valley for 8 years has been dull, and it is not the madder, it is the yard. That is not in any of these papers. No, she said. Nothing that matters ever is. He stayed 40 minutes. He asked what a mordant was, and she told him it was a metal salt taken into the fibre first, so that the dye had something to catch hold of, and that alum gave a clear ground and iron gave a sad one and darkened everything it touched. He wrote none of it down. When he left, he stopped at the door and looked at the 11 strips in the south window for a moment, the way a man looks at a thing he has stopped seeing, and went out. Amos Trowin had been at Quernmore for 51 years and had woven the great hanging in the long hall when he was 23. He worked now at the end loom in the loom shop, which had once run 11 looms and now ran 2, and he worked slowly because his hands had begun to go 3 winters before. Susanna found him one afternoon threading a heddle with the shuttle in his lap and his thumb going like a hair. "Sit back," she said. "I have got long fingers and nothing to do with them. You have got a vat to feed. The vat is warm and the vat is fed, and the vat can sulk for an hour without me. Sit back, Mr. Trowin." He sat back. She threaded 96 ends, and he told her when she went wrong, which was twice, and neither of them said one word about his hands. "You will have heard about Merrick," he said when they were nearly done. "I have heard the name in the yard." Nobody finishes the sentence. "No," said Amos. "They wouldn't. Well, he had this dye house 40 years. He was a hard old article, and he could put a scarlet on wool that would stop a bishop. When the old Duke died, there was money wanted, and money wanted quick, and this one was 26, and frightened of it, though he'd have died before he'd say frightened. And Merrick was told the dye stuffs was to come cheaper. And Merrick said what your father would have said and what you'd say, which is that he'd not have it in the building. And it came in anyway." "It come in anyway," said Amos. "Turmeric and annatto out of Hull, and a bill of it that long, and I saw it come in on the cart, and the cloth off it was beautiful, girl. That's the thing nobody will credit. It was the loveliest green anybody in this valley ever wove. And they hung it in the long hall in the September, and Merrick stood under it with his hat in his hand, and he says, 'Don't sell on it.' He says, 'Hang it a 12-month and look at it again in the light.' And his Grace stood there in a room with 2 windows in it, and looked up at that wall and said it was as good as anything his father ever had, and he sold the whole of the Corverdale order on the strength of it, and 11 more besides. And in a year the leaves were blue." "In a year the leaves were blue," said Amos. "And the orders come back, and the name of this valley was Mud from here to Norwich, and a man who has said a thing in front of a room has got to put it somewhere, so it went on Merrick, stood him up in that yard in front of the whole works, and said he'd been cheated by his own dye master, and turned him out at an hour's notice. And there was men here that had known Merrick 30 year, and not one of us opened our mouths, and I include myself, and I have had a long time to think about that." Susanna's hands had stopped. "Where did he go?" "Netherbridge. Took a room over the saddlers and mended what folk brought him. And he was dead in 4 year, and there's nothing on him in that churchyard but grass. And I will tell you the rest of it, because you'll not get it off anybody else. That yellow was never Merrick's buying. His Grace ordered it himself over Merrick's head in his own hand, because it come to £200 saved in a year, and he was 26 and frightened. He knows it. He has known it 8 year, and in 8 year I have never once heard him say it out loud, and that is a man rotting on his feet in front of you, and you may make of it what you like." She made nothing of it out loud. She went back to the dye house and fed her vat and stood a long time in the doorway. 2 days later, she came down at 6 and found a lead pipe run from the great rainwater butt at the end of the stable roof, along the wall, through the dye house, and over her trough, with a plug of oak in the end of it and a new stopcock. Nobody had asked her whether she wanted it. Nobody mentioned it that day or any day after. She stood with the soft water running over her wrist for the better part of a minute, and then she got on. He came back that night, late, because the second vat was coming up and had to be watched, and there is nothing to do while a vat comes up but sit by it. "Your father," he said, "was he a good man?" "He was a fair one. I do not know that he was a warm one." She turned the ash paddle over. "He taught me the trade because there was nobody else to teach it to, and then he was ashamed of having done it, and then he got over that, and then he was proud of it and could not say so. That took about 9 years altogether." "And your mother?" "Died when I was 4. There is not a story there, sir, I am sorry to say. She had a fever and it went badly. You need not call me sir every time. Yo does it enough for a household." "What would you rather?" "I do not know," said the Duke of Quernmore. "That is an honest answer, and it is the first one I have given in this valley for some time." The flower came up on the vat at 1:30 in the morning, bronze on green, and they both leaned over and looked at it, and neither of them said anything about it, and it was the pleasantest hour either of them had had that year. The rain came in on the last day of August and stopped work for 2 days, and on the second afternoon he brought an old order book down to the dye house and put it on the bench in front of her. "Explain these to me," he said. "Explain what?" "My grandfather's colours. There are 90 of them in this book, and I do not know what one of them is." He opened it. Goose-turd green. "That is a real colour," said Susanna. "It is a real word, madam, I grant you. It is a real colour and a good one, and it is welled over a weak blue with a little iron, and it comes out a yellowish dark green, and if you have ever been behind a goose you will find the name is well earned and honestly come by." "And this?" "Dead Spaniard. A grey with a pink in it." "Why is it dead?" "Because the man who named it was not a kind man," she said. "Try the next." "Puke. A dark brownish colour, very handsome on a coat." "It is not handsome," he said. "It is called puke. It is a good honest colour that has been sat on by its name, which is a thing that happens to people too." "Go on." "Sad green." "Sad only means dull, sir. It does not mean sorrowful. A sad colour is a colour with no shine on it." "I have a great deal of sad furniture." "You have a great deal of sad everything," said Susanna, "and I have been very polite about it for 3 weeks." He looked up. She went on turning the wool over in the copper and did not look up at all, and after a moment he laughed, and it was not a laugh anybody in that house would have recognized. "Gingerline," he read, "a reddish violet. Popinjay, a green blue, like the bird. Sheep's colour." "That one is my favourite in the whole book," she said, "because it is a lie. Sheep's colour is any colour at all, so long as nobody has dyed it. It is the wool as it comes off the animal. Some clever fellow got tired of writing undyed and gave it a name and charged for it, and it went into the books, and here it is. And here is a duke reading it out to me in a dye house 100 years after. You are telling me my grandfather was sold undyed wool under a fancy name. I am telling you that everybody has always done that about everything, said Susanna, and that the only defense there has ever been against it is to know the trade or to know somebody who does. Read me one, he said, and pushed the book across. You are enjoying yourself. I am aware of it. It is unfamiliar, and I would like it to go on. Read me one. So she read him one, and he guessed wrong, and she read him another, and he guessed wrong again, and then accused her of inventing Isabella, which she had not, and they argued about that for a quarter of an hour with the rain coming down on the dye-house roof and the coppers ticking as they cooled. Twice he said he had business, twice he did not go. At the end of it he said, Philemotte, and she said, dead leaf, and it is French, and you have said it wrong. And he said, I have said it as it is said in this house. And she said, then it is said wrong in this house. And neither of them won, and the rain went on, and it was dark before he went up the hill. Yeo came down the next morning with the wage book under his arm, and stood in the door in the manner of a man delivering himself of something rehearsed. Miss Pascoe. There is a difficulty with the ledger. There is a difficulty with your ledger about twice a week, Mr. Yo, and you carry it about with you like a bad tooth. What is it? I have entered you, he said, as woman, die house. It is what the book says. There has always been a woman, die house, and it has always been 8 shillings, and you are down for 15, and it looks. He stopped. It looks as though somebody is being paid 15 shillings for 8 shillings of work. It looks, said Yo, as though I do not know what you are. She wiped her hands and came and looked at the page over his arm. What did the book say for Mr. Merrick? Die master. Then write die master. Yo did not move for a moment. In the yard, somebody was rolling a barrel. I have kept this book 9 years, he said. I wrote the entry that put him out of it. Turned off, it says, and the date, and I ruled the line under it myself with a ruler. He set the book on the bench. I want you to know that I did not think it was right at the time. I thought it, and I did not say it, and I have said a good deal of nothing for a good many years, and I would not have you take me for a fool as well. I do not take you for a fool, said Susanna. I take you for a man in a bad house who wants his place. There are a great many of us. You are not in want of your place. I have been in want of a place every day since April, she said, and if you think otherwise, it is because I keep my face still, and I learned that off my father, and he learned it off his. Yeo took up his pen and wrote, and blotted it, and looked at it for rather longer than the writing had taken. Die master, he said. Well, there it is. And then, at the door, without turning round, nobody has called you anything else in this yard for a fortnight, if it is of any interest to you. I am the last in the building to write it down. That is generally the case with me. On the 6th of September, the flue of the Blue Vat's fire cracked in the night. The wind had gone round to the east and drove the smoke back down the shaft, and the fire choked and sulked and went out some time before 2, and the great vat, which had stood at 90 degrees for 11 years, was at 61 when Susanna put her hand in at 4:30 and came awake all over. She got Dorcas out of her bed. She got Amos, who could do nothing but who would not stay away. And the Duke came down in his shirt with his coat over it at 10 minutes to 5, because Dorcas, going past the house for the yard key, had shouted up at a lit window without much caring whose it was. Tell me plainly, he said. Plainly, that vat is not a tub of dye, it is a fermentation, and it has been going 11 years, and it has been going since before your father's time in one form or another. It has gone cold. If it gets colder, it goes over the other way and dies. And once it is dead, and I can start you another, and it will want 6 weeks to come into work, and there is not 6 weeks between now and Lady Day. 42 yards of hanging, sir. There is your blue in that hole, and it is dying while we talk. What does it want? Heat, slowly, not fast. If I throw heat at it, I will kill it quicker than the cold will. It wants to come up 2 degrees in an hour and no more, and it wants feeding because it has eaten everything in it, and it wants stirring every hour so it does not lie in layers, and it wants somebody's arm in it every hour to see whether it is willing. That is, until it comes back or until it does not, and that will be somewhere about noon. Then tell me what to carry. He carried bran, 4 bushels of it, from the granary at the top of the yard, in the dark, in the rain that had come on with the east wind. He drew the cracked flue, packed it with wet clay and a sheet of lead off the stable roof that he went and got himself with a crowbar, and laid a fire in it that Susanna could find no fault with. And when she said so, he said his father had taught him to lay a fire, and it was the only thing the 2 of them had ever done in the same room without argument. Dorcas kept the copper going for the hot liquor. Amos sat by the vat all night with a lamp and a thermometer and called the reading out every quarter of an hour in a voice like a man calling the depth off the bow of a boat. 61, 61, 62. At 3 degrees an hour, the lime went in, slaked and stirred to a cream, and then the bran, and then madder for the fermentation to feed on, and Susanna stirred it with the long ash paddle in the slow figure that keeps air out, over and back, for 11 minutes by Amos's watch, and stopped, and put the plank over. Now what? Now nothing, she said. Now it either wants to live or it does not, and there is not a thing in this world I can do to persuade it. Nobody went to bed. At 6, she put her arm into the elbow and brought out a slip of wool that came up greenish and stayed greenish and did not turn in the air, and she put it in her pocket and said nothing, and the Duke of Quernmore, watching her face, learned that he could read it and was frightened by how much he minded. At 7, he burnt his hand on the copper, and she took his wrist and put it in the cold trough and held it there under the running beck for 100 seconds without either of them saying one word about it. At 9:30, she pulled the plank off, and there was nothing on the liquor at all. At 10:30, there was a scum. At 11, the scum had a copper cast on it, and at 12:12, in a wet grey noon with the wind still in the east, Amos Trewin stood up off his stool for the first time in 9 hours and said, "There's your flour, girl." And Susanna Pascoe put her forehead down on the wet plank cover of a dye vat and stayed like that while somebody's hand came down on her shoulder and stayed there too. And I will only stop for a moment and only to ask, is there a light on near you where you are, or are you sitting in the dark with this? Stay where you are a little while yet. The night at Quernmore is not done, and neither, if you can spare it, are we. Miss Lydia Trevanion had been the 20th. She had been at Quernmore since the 2nd week of July, with an aunt for propriety and 11 trunks, and she was the last of the 20 left in the house, and everyone from the kitchen to the county understood what that meant. She was 22, and had been trained the way a hawk is trained, and she could come into a room in such a way that the room arranged itself around her without being asked. She came into the dye house on the 14th of September in a pale grey walking dress and stood just inside the door where the floor was dry. "They tell me you have saved the works," she said. "They exaggerate. I have kept a vat alive. You must let me look at everything. I shall have to know it all, I suppose, in time." She took 2 steps and stopped and looked at the trough, the coppers, the drying rails, the blue arms of the woman at the bench. "How do you bear the smell?" "I stopped smelling it in about a week." "And your hands? Do you stop seeing those as well?" "No," said Susanna. "But then nobody looks at them but me." Miss Trevanion smiled. It was a good smile, and it had cost a great deal to build. "You should be careful, Miss Pascoe," she said. "I say it kindly. There is a way this looks from the house, and it is not the way it looks from in here. He is down at this building at all hours. The maids talk about it, and the maids' talk goes up to the county in a week, and in the county there is a word for a woman in a workplace that a gentleman visits at night, and the word does not stop to ask whether she was stirring a pot." "Then the county may say it," said Susanna. "It will not change the temperature of my vat." "You are not frightened of it?" "No." "Why not?" And there was something under the smile then, gone almost at once. "Everyone is frightened of it. I have been frightened of it since I was 15 years old. What have you got that I have not?" "Nothing at all," said Susanna. "I have lost mine already, that is the whole of it. My father is dead. My mother is dead. The house I was born in was sold in May, and there was £8 over when the debts were paid. There is not one thing left in the world that can be taken off me except a wage, and I have got a trade, so I can get another wage. That is not courage, Miss Trevanion. It is arithmetic." "You are in love with him." The copper ticked. Out in the yard a cart went by. "I am dyeing 42 yards of hanging for the Earl of Corverdale," said Susanna, "and I have a weld bath to bring up at 4. "He will marry me," said Lydia Trevanion, and her voice was perfectly level and perfectly clear, and had a crack somewhere far down in it like a bell with a flaw. It is arranged in everything but the saying, my father has arranged it. I was brought here as the 20th of a list, and I have outlasted 19, and I am not going home, Miss Pascoe, because there is nothing at home to go to, and if you knew what it costs to be looked at for a whole summer by a man conducting an examination, you would not stand there being sorry for me, which is what you are doing, and I cannot bear it. I did not say anything. You did not have to. You have the plainest face in England. She turned at the door. The green in the hall is my green. My father sent the wool. Ask him. She was wrong about that, and she knew she was wrong before she reached the yard gate, and she said it anyway, and it sat in the dye house after she had gone like smoke. At supper that night, in front of Yeo and the aunt and a curate from the village, she said quite lightly that it was a comfort to have somebody about the place who could be spared for the dirty work, and everybody laughed except the curate, who had not been listening, and Amos, who was not there, and the Duke, who put down his glass and did not pick it up again. That was also the week he had her father's scales fetched back. They had gone in April with everything else, and she had watched them go and had said nothing about it to a living soul. They stood on her bench on the Thursday morning with the worn pan and a new cord, and she stood and looked at them for a long time, and then she put a weight in and dressed the beam and got on with the weld. There was a thing he did not know that she did. On Saturdays, when the work stood idle from noon, she walked the 4 miles into Netherbridge and paid a shilling to a mason called Bowden against a headstone for a man buried 8 years in unmarked ground, and it was to be 9 and 6pence altogether, and she was at 6 shillings by the middle of September. Bowden had been told to cut the name and the trade and nothing else. The Duke of Quernmore, riding back from the assizes on the 20th by the church road, saw her standing at a mason's counter with her purse open and her boots white with dust, and did not go in and did not speak of it, and rode home the long way round. He sat in his own hall that evening under 40 feet of blue leaves, and understood that he had spent 8 years devising ways to find out whether people were honest, and that a woman with £8 to her name in the whole world was buying a gravestone for the man he had ruined, and that no examination he had ever set had asked anybody to do anything at all. The heat came at the end of September, 3 days of it, still and white, with thunder standing off in the north and not coming. She took the last of the weld out at 8 in the evening and hung it on the rails, and the dye house was too hot to sit in, so she went out and sat on the wall of the tenter ground with the grass gone yellow all round her and the frames standing up empty in the dusk. She had the whole of it clear in front of her by then, and she looked at it the way she would have looked at a bad batch. He came down to the dye house because the works was the only thing he had left that was going forward, and she was the only person in it who told him true things, and a man will go a long way for either. The rainwater pipe was because a dye master with hard water is a dye master who fails. The coal was because a cold vat is a dead vat. The scales were 9 shillings and a kindness. And a kindness from a man like that is the way he says thank you, because he cannot say it with his mouth, and Amos had told her that in so many words on her 2nd week. And the hours at the vat were because there was nowhere else in that whole grey house where anybody spoke to him plainly, and she happened to be the one standing in it. That was the sum of it. She turned it over and could find no error in the working. He would marry Miss Trevanion because a duke marries, and because it was arranged in everything but the saying, and because a girl of 22 with a cracked bell in her voice had nowhere else on this earth to be, and that would be right, and it would even be kind, and there would be a woman in the long hall who had been brought up from the age of 6 to stand in it, and she would stay, or she would not. She thought she would not. She thought a dye house 40 feet from a house with a new duchess in it would be a slow way of being ill, and she had watched her father be ill slowly and had not thought much of it as a method. She said it out loud once, sitting on the wall in the dark with the thunder not coming, because a thing said out loud can be put down afterwards, and a thing kept in cannot. "You are 26 years old," said Susanna Pascoe, "and you have blue hands, and you love a man who lets you sit up all night with him because you know the temperature of a vat. And that is all it is. and you will get up now." She got up. She went in and banked the fire and looked at the flour on the blue vat and put the plank over it, and slept and was at work at 6. The samples for the second Corverdale set came off the loom on the 28th and went up to the house to be seen, and it was in the long hall in front of 11 people that Lydia Trevanion said what she had been holding for a fortnight. "Before anybody praises it," she said, "there is something His Grace should see." She had a bill in her hand. It was 8 years old, and it had come out of the works office, and it was for turmeric and annatto to the value of £192, delivered to the Quernmore Works in the November of that year, and at the foot of it, in a small commercial hand, was the name of the merchant who had supplied it, and the name was Elias Pascoe of Netherbridge. "Her father sold this house the yellow that ruined it," said Lydia Trevanion. "And she has been in the dye house 11 weeks, and there is a green in that sample already going, and I say she has come here to finish what her family began for the sake of an old man in a churchyard, and I say ask her." The room made the noise rooms make, and the Duke of Quernmore, who had been told about that bill on the first morning of September by Susanna herself, standing at her bench with her sleeves rolled, in 11 plain words and without being asked, looked at the paper in Lydia Trevanion's hand and did not look up and said, "Miss Pascoe, explain this to me." Susanna stood quite still. She looked at the top of his bent head. "I have explained it to you," she said, "once, in my own dye house, in September," and she walked out of the long hall, and nobody stopped her, and the Duke of Quernmore stood with a piece of paper in his hand for 1 hour and 11 minutes, alone, under his own wall, and there was not a day left in his life when he did not know exactly how long it had been. They gathered in the long hall the next morning at 11, because Yeo, who had been told to arrange nothing, arranged it, on the grounds that a thing said in front of people has to be unsaid in front of people, or it is never unsaid at all. Susanna came in with a wooden tray in her hands and set it on the table under the hanging. On it were 11 strips of wool, each with a card tag, furred grey with dust. "These were in the south window of the dye house when I came," she said. "They were nailed there by Mr. Merrick, who had this dye house 40 years, and they have been in that window ever since, and Mistress Rudd has dusted round them twice a week for 8 years. "Anybody may hang wool in a window," said Lydia Trevanion. "Anybody may, only a dyer knows what for." She took up the first strip. "This is how it is done, and it has been done this way for 200 years. You dye your piece, you cut a strip, you write on the tag what is in it and the day you hung it, and you fold the strip in half and pin the lower half under the card, so that half of it is in the light and half of it is in the dark. And then you wait, because there is no other way to find out. Light is the only honest customer a dyer has." She turned the first strip over and unfolded it and held it up. "That is dated the March of the year the old Duke died. Green, welled over indigo, alum mordant. The half that has been under the card these 8 years, and the half that has been in the sun these 8 years, hold them together. There is no difference in them a person could name." She took another and laid them along the table in their order, and the room came round the table, which is a thing rooms do. "That one is the June, the same. That one is the September, and that is the last honest green ever dyed in this valley. And this one," she said, "is dated the 4th of December, 3 weeks after your turmeric came in on the cart. The dark half is green, the light half is blue, and so is every strip after it, and there are 5 of them, and they are dated, and they are in his hand, and they were hung and folded and pinned a full 7 months before he was turned out of that yard for the fault." Nobody said anything. Mr. Merrick was not cheating this house. He was recording it. He hung the proof of it in his own window where anybody who knew the trade could read it, and then he stood in the yard and let himself be blamed, and did not say one word, and I do not know why, and I would give a great deal to. My father sold this house that yellow. It is on the bill, and it is his name, and I told his Grace so on the first morning of September, and I will say it again here. And my father was wrong to sell it, whoever asked him for it. But he sold it in the November, and the green was going in that window by the December, and no hand of mine touched a pot in this valley until this July, and there is not a man alive who can dye a thing backwards." "She may have written those tags herself," said Lydia Trevanion. "Last week. Any of it. She's been alone in that building for 11 weeks. "I cannot read," said Dorcas Rudd. Everybody turned. She had come in at the low door in her wet apron, and she stood there with her split hands held in front of her, and her voice was not steady at all. "I cannot read what's on them tags, and I never could, but I have dusted round them 11 bits of wool twice a week for 8 year, since Mr. Merrick was in that dye house and me a young woman, and they have not been off that frame in all that time. Not for the whitewashing, not for the glazing, not never. And if any one of you says different, you may come and look at the nail heads, for they are rusted into the wood, and the dust is a 1/4 inch on the sill behind. That's all I know. That's what a woman that does the rinsing knows." She swallowed. "And I'll not stand in a room and hear her called a liar. Not by anybody. Not in this house." The Duke of Quernmore said very quietly, "Thank you, Mistress Rudd." And Lydia Trevanion stood in the middle of the long hall, and her hands came up and did not seem to know where to go, and the thing that had been holding her upright since the age of 6 stopped working, all at once, in front of 11 people. "I was to be certain of him by Michaelmas," she said. "That is what my father wrote. Certain by Michaelmas, or come home." Her face had nothing on it at all now, and it was worse than crying. "I was in that office 3 days ago, looking for the pattern books, and I found the bill, and I read the name on it, and I did not sleep, and I thought if I said it first." She stopped. "There is nothing at home. There is a house with the plate gone, and a man in it who will find somebody else, and it will be somebody worse. I have never once in my life had a thing to do that was mine. She has had a thing to do since the day she got here, and it is hers, and everybody in this valley says her name as though it were a trade, and I have been standing about in it all summer being looked at. Nobody helped her. That is what a room is like." Susanna Pascoe picked the 11 strips up off the table, one by one, and put them back in the tray, and squared them. "Miss Trevanion," she said, "the carriage will not be round before 3. There is nobody at all in the small drawing-room at this hour, and it has the fire lit, and the door out of it goes to the stairs without crossing the hall. You may sit in there as long as you like, and nobody will come in, because I shall say so." Nothing else was said. The girl went out through the small drawing-room door, and Susanna shut it after her, and that was the end of it. Amos found her that evening in the loft over the dye-house, sitting on the boards with her father's scales in her lap and the 2 crocks by the door. "You are never going." "I am going Thursday. There is a woolen dye-house at Ravensden wants a hand, and I wrote a fortnight ago, before any of this, which you may believe or not as you please. After what you done in that hall this morning. Because of it." She wrapped the beam in sacking. "I have put his works right. The vat is alive, the weld is in, the second set will hang, and it will be good in 20 years, and Dorcas can feed a vat now nearly as well as I can, and she will do it for 8 shillings, and you may tell Mr. Yeo to write it in his book. That is what I came for, and it is done." "That is not what you came for." "No," said Susanna, "it is not." She sat with her hands flat on the sacking. "Mr. Trewin, I have been 11 weeks in a place where a man walked down a hill at 11 o'clock at night to ask me what a mordant was, and I stood in that hall this morning, and he did not look at me. He had been told the whole of it in his own dye-house in September, out of my own mouth, and when the room turned he held up a piece of paper and asked me to say it again. And it does not signify that he was wrong. That is the part I would explain to you if I could. It would be the same if he had been right. He's not a bad man, girl. I never said he was. I said a thing holds or it does not, and the holding was decided long before anybody thought to look at it." She got up. "That is true of colour, and I am afraid it is true of the rest. There is no use standing under it and hoping. You take it down and you read it and you go on with your work." He went down the ladder slowly because his knees were as bad as his hands, and she came after him with the lamp and held it over the stairs so he could see the treads, and neither of them said good night. He came at 7 the next morning into the yard where there were 9 people. Yo with the wage book, Dorcas at the trough door, Amos on his stool in the loom shop doorway, the carter with the horse in the shafts and her 2 crocks already up on the cart. "Miss Pascoe." "Your Grace." "No," he said. "No, I have got—" He stopped. He put his hand on the cartwheel and took it off again. "I stood in that hall for an hour with that paper in my hand, not because I believed her. That is the thing. I never believed her for 1 second. I stood there for an hour because there was a room full of people, and I have not said a true thing out loud in front of a room since I was 26. And the last time I did it, I said it about a man, and it was wrong, and he died in a rented room in Netherbridge, and I did it. I did that. Not Merrick, and not your father. I ordered that yellow over his head to save £200, and I put it on him in my own yard." Yeo looked at the cobbles. Amos did not move at all. "You told me on the 1st of September, and I asked you again in front of 11 people, and there is no name for that but cowardice. And I have got no defense, and I am not going to stand here and make one. You said you would not tell a man a thing was good before it had hung a season in the light." He looked up. "It has hung a season. Everyone in this yard has looked at it. I am asking you to stay, and I am asking you to marry me, and I am aware what I am worth this morning." The horse shifted. Nobody in that yard was breathing much. "Say it again," said Susanna, "and say my name in it." "Susanna," he said, "stay." The Netherbridge headstone went up in the 2nd week of October, and it says the name and the trade and nothing else, and it was paid for by a shilling a week to the last 6pence, because she would not let it be otherwise, and he had the sense not to argue. Lydia Trevanion went to her mother's sister in Lyme and was married 3 years later to a man with a wharf and a temper no worse than most, and she wrote once, briefly, about a garden and was answered in the same manner, and that was the whole of that correspondence, and it suited them both. Dorcas Rudd was made second at the vats at 12 shillings and took the rinsing out of her own hands and gave it to a woman from the village, which she said was the finest hour of her life, and her knuckles healed over that winter and stayed healed. Amos Trewin lived to see the 2nd Corverdale set go up and threaded no more heddles after the spring, but sat in the loom shop doorway most days, telling anybody who would stand still that he had woven the hanging in the long hall when he was 23, and that the blue in it had never shifted a hair, which was true. They were married in the church at the bottom of the valley in November, and the works stood idle for the day, which had not happened in 11 years. And in the March, when the light came back strong enough to be worth anything, they hung the new green in the long hall beside the old one, and Susanna Pascoe cut a strip of it 2 fingers wide and wrote the date on a card in a small upright hand and folded the strip and pinned the lower half under the card and nailed it in the south window of the dye house in the 3rd row below the 11. "How long?" he said. 20 years, she said. "And then you may ask me again, and I will tell you." "And what shall you say?" "How can I know that, sir? It has not hung yet." "So, what have you got, somewhere about you, that you have never once taken out and held up in a good light? Come back and sit with me again, and we will find out together what has held."